as we are continuing our study of Hebrews. Just a bit of a recap so we can know where we're launching from today. The week before, I believe, week before last, we were in Hebrews 10, and this is where the author and our hermeneutic and our tradition here, we believe Priscilla laid out very simply that Christ sacrificed his life for us, thus removing the need for us to continue the old tradition of sacrifice, because Christ's sacrifice was for one and for all. And in that, we've got this faith that we have this personal relationship with God, and this faith should animate us to persevere through whatever challenges lie ahead of us. But moreover, we get to chapter 11. The author takes the time to go over what is faith. Very famous verse from chapter 11, verse 1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then the author laid out, indeed, our ancestors launched in faith themselves. And you got to remember, Priscilla is writing from a deep Jewish tradition. And so I'm sorry to take a moment and sidebar. Eric, are you okay? I didn't notice your eye.
You got a cataract.
Okay, I had a cataract surgery yesterday.
Oh, okay.
But it's kind of miraculous. Yeah, they just, take out the old lens, put a new lens in. There's no fuss, no bother, no pain. Just, but it's got to be covered up.
Excellent. I'm glad that you're okay. I was worried there for a second. I was like, did you get the fracas? I'll go take care of him. All right. So back to the lesson. The author is talking about faith and saying that we've got these examples of faith in our tradition. Now let's remember that whenever we're coming to scripture, we have to look at it from the perspective of who the author was. For us, that author is Priscilla, a woman steeped in the Jewish faith and tradition. Who the author is writing to, we believe that she's writing to a church that is outside of the sphere of Jewish influence in the secular Roman world. And what the author is trying to convey to that specific group of people. The author is saying, hey, we are a part of a much deeper, much longer, very rooted tradition of faith. And then she goes about laying out some examples of that. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham. And we took some time last week to really go over that wild story of Abraham and sacrifice, where Abraham is told by God that he's going to have a son at a very advanced age. He finally has that son, and then the same God who promised him this son, the same God who delivered this son, asked him to sacrifice this son. What an amazing and wild story this is. And Abraham had faith that God would do something, that God would find a way to not, leave him broken in all of his dreams, to not have him, give up this great promise of a future, of him being a great man, a father of a great nation. And of course, we know how that story goes. Abraham makes it up the mountain. God then instructs him to slaughter a ram that was found stuck in the thicket. And by the way, I was talking about this story with my son the other day, and he goes, "That's too bad for the ram," right? But I venture to say, actually, what's interesting about that is this ram was stuck in the thicket, as it's described. That ram may not have survived anyway. There's something of God's mercy and the fullness of God's plan that ram was culled in the way that it was. But that being said, Priscilla moves on, and I believe we left off at verse 23. Sue, did you have a question? Did you raise your hand? Oh, you're muted, Sue. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
When you were talking about this and reading, the question came, the notion that we worship a God that requires the blood sacrifice of a child is disgusting. And I don't understand how that ever got incorporated into the message of Jesus.
Yeah. I would say there's a couple things there, Sue. One is the historical practice that was happening at that time. So, thinking back to the Abrahamic age.
Well, that was part of Judaism, but Christianity is something else.
Oh, certainly. But I mean, even still, there's an element where it can be a little, there's something strange about the notion that Christ had to die for our sins. I would say to that, for me, what the way this works for me theologically is that we know that Scripture says the wages of sin are death, right?
No.
And sin, let me continue. Sin brings death in many forms, right? It can harm relationships. It can kill opportunities. It can destroy what God's plan is for a family, for a community, for us. And
that's what the love of God would do.
How's that? It's not something that God would do?
That's what a loving God would do.
Yeah.
A plan for our happiness and our health.
Yeah. So there's great consequence that comes with sin. When we miss the mark in this world, there can be great consequence. And so literally, well, let me say it another way. Figuratively, Christ's sacrifice is that ultimate sacrifice, right? That Christ dies, and gives us hope of resurrection. Christ dies and gives us a great example that even in the midst of incredible depravity, right? It is an incredible human failing that put Christ to death, right? That God still loves and cares for us, that God will still deliver, that God can resurrect. There's so many rich things there figuratively that I draw from this. But should actual blood sacrifice be required? I don't know the answer to that. Yes.
Just when you were stating that, I was thinking again, putting things back into context and how in kind of the more expansive understanding of our spiritual formation, something that directly happens to one person isn't necessarily the net story, that it's something that is utilized
Elizabeth, can you talk louder?
Yeah.
I was just noting that you had a very specific question and a very specific place that you were going with that, Sue, and that I was reminded that we all together are a collective of the body of saints here, right? And our loving God sometimes uses each of us, like he used Job, to work through and to communicate and to share among a community certain principles and truths, if you will. So I think that this story, while it is in this past ritualistic element that's extremely disturbing to our day, was something that was relatively widely practiced, and the utilization of God providing in Abraham's great faith in it, not only an individual way but a communal way, was the way forward.
Yeah, why did Christ have to die? is at a certain level the question here. And I would say, why did humanity not receive him? Is an equally interesting question.
Say that again. Why did humanity what?
Why did humanity not receive him?
Jesus?
Yeah, why did humanity not recognize this powerful figure,
Oh,
God
actually,
among us?
They did receive him. I'm reading a very interesting book entitled After Jesus, Before Christianity. And it's 200 years there before they started getting the Bible together and getting some dogma together. But they were, a lot of these things that we think that are necessary and part of Christianity were not there. They were study groups that met all over that part of the world in little towns. It was.
Shelley, you're on mute.
There. I wanted to point out to Sue's question that, it's not like what we're seeing with the story of Abraham is an evolution of faith, that God ultimately did not require Abraham to give up his son, and that we're seeing, I guess I just get a little concerned when we say, well, Jews do this and Christians do that there was an evolution in the Jewish faith, and that's what we're reading in the Old Testament, is how these different laws and morals and ideas about how to stay together in community evolved over time. But I just want to point out, ultimately, God did not require that of Abraham, that he give up his only son. Ultimately, he backed away from that, right?
But the notion of a blood sacrifice is very much part of our communion service. So it's still there. We haven't got rid of it.
Yeah. But I think, Sue, that we're coming to it, and Helen, I'll be with you in just a second. I think we're coming to it with our modern sensibility. And maybe not looking at, and I'm not an ancient person, so I don't have a full understanding of what that may have meant for them. But within that, in my studies, many people have written that the ancients believed that, there was life in blood, right? That vitality was found there. And that if you would be willing to offer up the first fruits of the best of your community, that if you would be willing to offer up sacrifice, that in that you would be able to open up more space for greater things within your community. That was an ancient belief. And we're looking at it with a modern sensibility of being like, that's horrible and barbaric. But I would like to maybe take a step back from that. And for me, what works best for me in dealing with that and being a part of a faith tradition that is connected to that is to realize all the great rich symbolism that's there. To realize also that death is not final. That is a shared perspective that we have with antiquity, right? And that in the story of Christ, we get the reality that death is dead. that there is a broader and more refulgent reality that we live on, in as a communion of saints. Helen, what were you? You're on mute though, so you got to take a moment.
Are you addressing a question to me?
To Helen Arnold. I thought she had her hand up earlier, but you're on mute, Helen, so I can't see you. I can't hear you.
She's talking though.
Oh, I don't know how to take you off of mute. I think at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, there's a little microphone button with an X through it. If you press that, you'll be off of mute. Or if you, I don't know.
Or the top of your screen, as it is in my iPad, Helen. Maybe yours is at the top of your screen. You just,
Well, if someone wouldn't mind texting her and maybe some instruction, that would be great.
She usually doesn't struggle, so I don't know if she
Yeah,
has a big
it's okay.
machine.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So, Sue, I shared, let's take a moment and maybe table these questions. And the only reason I say let's do that is because I feel that, for me, I've got my perspective as far as that's concerned. And perhaps this is something that we might want Doig to lean in on a little bit. Yeah.
I think I've unmuted.
Oh, there you go. Hey.
Yes, yay! I had to redo everything. Anyway, can you still hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I was just going to say, as far as giving up your son to sacrifice, I think it's just an indication of his father's complete faith in God.
That's right.
And if he believed so keenly into his very core that that was the right thing to do if God asked him to do it. But he showed God that he believed in him, and God did not take his son. But the other thing is too, huh?
No, go on, Helen.
Oh, now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. I feel that like we have this broken world that we're a part of, right? A world where Martin Luther King could be martyred, a world where JFK could be martyred, a world where, where these tragedies take place and there's no explanation for it. Yes, human failing, selfishness, greed, pride, all of those things, all those sins are a part of this. And yet we share this faith tradition. And I think this is something that Priscilla is saying, where the broader outline of God's plan and God's vision for us individually and as a community is so much bigger than the loss of life. But why God would require blood sacrifice, I think that ancient people believed that it was very elemental, that, God created us as physical beings and will require our physical sacrifice in order to show our devotion. Yeah.
Well, do we believe as Christians in this year that it's elemental for Christianity?
No. Not necessarily. Though I'll say this, I am raising two children. And I am raising two children who I would hope would be willing to put their lives on the line for what they believe is right. And a lot of that comes from my Christian ethic. A lot of that comes from, from the example of the great martyrs who have gone before them, including people like Martin Luther King, but especially the life of Jesus. And I would say that is in where I find, I find a connection, right? That there are times in this world where you've got to, stand up and let your voice be heard. And my reading.
That's
of
different,
the way
though.
that faith is that's true. Yeah. Chip,
John.
John, sorry. I'm sorry. My eyes are not working.
Is there any, as to God requiring a blood sacrifice, is there any other place in the Bible besides Abraham, besides this example, where there's something that can be construed as God requiring a sacrifice of a child? Certainly there's the sin offerings.
Well, it's all over the world. It was in Mexico and all over the Middle East.
So I said in the Bible.
Yeah, no, there's no other example biblically. I mean, other than obviously the death of Christ.
Right.
There's no other biblical example. You go through Leviticus and it's all the sacrifice of animals. And in fact, it's that Abraham story that we get that first example of a blood sacrifice of an animal in order to complete covenant with God.
So I think it might be extreme to say that God required the sacrifice of children.
No, he did not. He never did ask that sacrifice. He never completed that sacrifice.
You might look at this in a different, well, a different reading of this, a different reading of that language.
Thank you, John.
So a homely example. We went skiing with our little granddaughter. Alma was just starting. So she was up the hill and told her father, let her go and I'll catch her. And so we went across the hill and then aimed downhill. And Alma was probably thinking, oh, Grandpa's trying to kill me. But off she went. And I did catch her. And she didn't die. And you could say that I was testing her in the sense of a trial, or you could construe test to be doing something that's difficult. And if you read the Abraham story, God is asking Abraham to do something that's difficult. And it is in line with the old practice of sacrificing children. But it's not that God asks him to do it, but rather, you kind of think this is what you're supposed to do at this circumstance. Have faith. And it worked out.
I thank you. May I say something?
Of course, Inez.
I think perhaps sometimes some of us, we do take things literally. I'm very literal minded in general. And I appreciate what you all are saying. And I would ask us each to think about, why don't we think about symbolically, as one of you has said, could we not get stuck in our own small view, which I have, and Sue and I maybe have a similar literal minded, whatever, but at least I do. And I'd like to open to the fact that let's not get stuck in literalism and let's go on. And let's just, please, and we need to move on, please.
Thank you, Ines.
Well, let's take a moment with that then. Let's turn to Hebrews 11. And let's start with verse 23. And I'll read out for a bit, and then we'll go from there. Hebrews 11:23. Another example of faith. By faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered abuse suffered for the Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt unafraid of the king's anger, for he was preserved as though he persevered, as though he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. So Priscilla's giving another example of faith in things unseen, right? That Moses' parents saw his promise and hid him away. And then Moses saw the promise of a future for his people, his chosen people, and moved forward in that into a wilderness that he knew not of, right? A rich example of faith. Let's keep going. We might finish chapter 11. John, do you mind reading 29 to 29 to the end of the chapter? Let's go ahead and take a big chunk.
In faith, they crossed the Red Sea as if it were dry land, while the Egyptians, trying to do the same, were drowned. In faith, the walls of Jericho fell down when they had been circled for 7 days. In faith, Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the unbelievers because she had welcomed the spies. What more shall I say? Time will fail me if I give an account of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Through faith, they conquered kingdoms, acted righteously, earned the promises. They closed the mouths of lions, quenched the raging fires, escaped the blades of swords. They were powerful in weakness, became strong in battle, turned away the attacks of foreigners. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to gain a better resurrection. Some bore mockery and flogging, even bonds and prison. They were stoned or sawed in half or killed by the sword. They were homeless and went around in the skins of sheep and goats. They were in want and hardship and maltreated. They were too good for the world, and they wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and ravines. All these were attested through their faith, but they did not receive what was promised, since God foresaw for us something better, and they were not to reach perfection except with us.
So just a heads up for people on Zoom, Alvin had to leave. He was in a small accident. Mercifully, he's fine, but his car suffered some damage, so he's going out to meet with an adjuster. So he asked if I could just lead the conversation around what we're reading going forward. Does anybody want to offer up any insights from what John Kerry just read, or questions, thoughts? Click.
Elizabeth, what was your question again? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Alvin had to leave, so we're just moving forward, and was inquiring if people, after having heard John Kerry read those verses, if they had any insights or comments or questions. And I think Clip is going to say something. I'm sorry about the volume, Sue.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I hadn't, but I will suggest something. And this goes back to verse 6, which is a very important verse. And it says, without faith it is impossible to please God. So that is fundamental to this entire chapter. All these people that are listed in this chapter, and there's like 20 or 30 people that have been listed here, they had faith, and that faith pleased God. And it says, but in this verse, it says, without that faith, none of them could please God. And so I think the question is, do you think that is literally true, that it is impossible to please God without faith? Because faith is a problem for a lot of people. A lot of people would say, I can just come to God. I don't have to. So it's too much just plain to have faith. They want more certainty. But I think this verse says, you're not going to get certainty. It's got to be by faith that we come to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So comments.
Are you saying we're here to please God?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's hear from Helen and then let's go to Rosemary. Thank you. Helen?
No,
Okay, Rosemary? You've been misunderstood.
I think this is what he just said was very interesting because I would meet many people in the hospital who were very uncertain prior to surgery or after having been given a really difficult understanding of what was wrong with them. And the thing is that faith is a free gift. The only thing you have to do is say yes. But that is very difficult for some people. They have had hard lives, or they have had something very difficult happen to them, or, or they had something very difficult happen to a family member, particularly at hospice or something like that. They don't understand why the family member is doing what they're doing. And it's a really difficult thing because it's a free gift. There's nothing much involved in saying yes. And yet that seems to be very difficult for people who seem to be afraid to do that. Because it means you have to give up something of your own.
I think that's very true, Rosemary.
And I think we see that in the example of the last verse 39, where there, John was just read that all of these people through their faith were persecuted and tortured and killed, yet with the understanding of a better life beyond.
Mm-hmm.
I think that faith is something we can achieve on our own, or is that something we do in community?
Well, but when if you read Viktor Frankl, and he talks about this very thing, that the one thing that he thought would be the worst thing that could happen to him while he was in Auschwitz was to have that taken away from him. He could continue on as long as he understood that he had faith.
Rosemary, can I ask a question? When
Sure.
you said it's hard for people to say yes to faith, and because they'd have to give something up, what did you mean by that? What do
Fear.
they have to-
Often it's fear.
They want to hold on to fear?
Fear or control?
Fear of control, yes. Because if you give that completely, then you lose control. You give up the control, and that's really hard for people, particularly today. People are so fearful, and fear hides anger. Anger hides fear.
And I think what you were saying leads a little bit into this concept, or metaphorically, of death to self. When we let go of our fear, when we can give that up, we have to, we death to self, essentially, death to our desire for control, and lead us into faith.
Interesting.
Let me just say one more thing that I completely agree with what Rosemary is saying, is that, there's nothing we can do in life without us taking a step of faith. And obvious examples are getting married, having children, taking on a new job, moving. Every one of these things takes faith. We don't know precisely how these things are going to turn out. So I'm going to shut up with that comment.
No, it's interesting because when a person is in pre-op and they're going to have a major surgical procedure, or they don't know what's going to come of it because they don't know what the diagnosis will be. That's a difficult situation, and people then have to just simply say, okay, I will give myself to the surgeon and I will give myself to God.
Okay, let's see.
Let
Shelley?
go and let God.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Yes.
Shelley?
Yeah, I had a question on verse 39. I didn't quite understand it. I understand that they were, though they were commended for their faith, they did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better so that they would not be made perfect. Can you explain a little bit about so they would not be made perfect, like in this life? Is that what it's talking about?
Apart from us.
They would be given Jesus.
So yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better so that they would not, apart from us,
Yeah.
be made perfect. So I think, as people are saying, it has to do with something of hanging together with the community or with this other larger force. Any other comments or thoughts? Shelley? No? Inez?
I was just reflecting on the priest. I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but it was after church last Sunday. I was online listening to him, and I think this is appropriate here because he spoke about sin, and he mentioned 3 different aspects of sin. Not the flesh he was talking about, not the below the belt he was talking about. It's marvelous. You got to hear this. If you didn't hear this, you got to go back to it. I actually found it quite amusing, but he did a great job. So the first sin, he said, was to give up, was to having to have control. Okay, so that was what we're just talking about, is give up control and have faith. So if sin is that we have to have control, okay, and we want to work toward being sinless, then we have to give the issue that we're dealing with. We have to give up control of this, not being the judge that it has to go our way, because we're putting our ego first and Right. we're thinking that we know better than really God. Okay, secondly, the sin is we have, it's safety and security. If you're going into surgery, I really appreciate Rosemary using that very specific thing that everybody will possibly be involved in. So safety and security. If you're going into serious surgery or anything like that, there is no way that you're going to be sure, because they'll often say you have a 50-50 chance or you have a la. Well, just give up that. You have to know, if I'm going into surgery, I have to know 100% that this surgery is going to work. Well, if it's heart surgery, and you have a chance of dying, but you also have the possibility of life. So give in, let go of the control, have peace. If peace of mind is part of the righteous person, well, I'm going to go for peace of mind because, okay. And I'm sorry, I forgot. Oh, the third one, the sin of approbation. We need to have esteem, well, forget that. We're not dealing with that right now. Okay. So, okay, everybody, that's enough for me.
That was lovely.
So that was a lovely, wrap up of what Lex spoke to during the everybody hour for adult formation between the 2 services on Sunday. And it is online. It's terrific if you didn't get a chance to hear it. And it's the second of 3. So I believe Lex is going to have kind of the end cap or the capstone this coming. No.
For Sunday brunch.
Next Sunday, because this is for Sunday brunch. Okay, thank you. Anything else on this beautiful passage? And I guess to Inez's point and to Priscilla's point, she's leveraging and utilizing all of these motifs and these stories and these histories because she wants to pull her community together through this faith and not in the individualistic manner, I believe. Shelley?
One thing I noticed in this last series of verses, it seems like the author Priscilla has moved from the Old Testament stories, and now it sounds like we're more current history with the Christians. Is that correct? Like sort of a lot of these unnamed people getting stoned and imprisoned and
I believe so, yes. Yeah. Anybody else on that? We can move into chapter 12. Kelly, would you mind reading? I don't know, up until, should we read the whole thing? Great.
Sure, totally. Let's see. There, chapter 12 or just
Chapter 12, yeah.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God.
Should we just unpack that? Maybe, I think that was a lot of material. Does somebody want to share their thoughts and insights? Comments, Mary?
I lost my place because I have a different translation of the Bible, and so particularly where we are.
We just read verse 12, 1 and 2. Chapter 12.
Okay.
Verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. What do you think that means?
Let go and let God. That seems to be my mantra today.
Yes. Also, the weight, the burden I feel is my own personal struggle, let's just say, whatever it is, right? And he's just saying, okay, yeah, you have struggle, but if you just lighten up a little, I'm going to carry it. You're not on this alone. We're together.
Yep.
So that in itself can lighten our load and give us peace of mind a little bit.
I think that's really great. And I think if we can remember that Priscilla is speaking to a community, and again, there's a personal message, but she's also recognizing when I read these words, a great cloud of witnesses, I think of the frenetic activity in a beehive and how, we're also affected and impacted by the adjacencies of these human beings and their activities. So that was kind of an interesting recollection that in this time where there wasn't a certain correct way or if you will, that she's trying to highlight that there is this frenetic crazy going on. So to let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of joy that was set before him endured the cross. So what do we think the joy set before Jesus is before he endures the cross?
Looking forward to be with his Father again.
If he's the great shepherd, what is Jesus put on among us? Go ahead, Mary, are you raising your hand? No.
No, I wasn't raising my hand, but I would say that he was redeeming his sheep. If he's the shepherd.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, that's, he said, Father, if you can take this away from me, I'm up for that.
So that's great. Thank you. So we're going to run the race that's set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. So a few days ago, a number of us spoke about the difference between shame and guilt. If anybody wants to share what they believe the differences are, I think that's super insightful for this passage. What is shame?
Well, we were talking about this at the C.S. Lewis meeting yesterday, and guilt is something I believe anyway that you have when you're about things that you did that you know were wrong. But shame is something you feel because of outside influences, things people say to you, things that make you feel like you don't fit in, but you haven't really done anything wrong at all. Somebody in your family may have stolen, be in jail or something, or have taken money from other people, and for that you feel shame even though you didn't do anything. So.
I'm so old, folks, that I remember watching when the first hearings that were produced on television. And I remember a man at Joe McCarthy and saying, "Shame on you." And it started a revolution.
I remember that too, and that it did, you're right.
So how do you relate that to the cross and its disregarding? So Jesus disregarded the shame. Can you draw that out a little bit more, Rosemary, for how it might be put into context in this passage?
Well, Jesus knew that he was the linchpin. He understood he was the linchpin, and that everything after that would be different.
But
That's
it's not.
great. So, go ahead, Kelly.
I thought I also remember reading, I forgot where, but that dying on the cross, actually not the cross, being crucified, not just Jesus, but other people being crucified during that time, like it's just a very humiliating death. Like the body is left up there for a long time. It's there for for a lot of people to see. So anyways, when I read this, and it's so powerful, it's also shame could be something that you put that someone takes on, like even if they haven't done anything. So Jesus, of course, being perfect, was so humble, perhaps, and so emptying that he was able to almost at the same time almost accept the shame of the cross, but be like, even though I'm still going to die this humiliating death in this incredibly humble way, because he does know what is going to come after. I know it's a little jump, but it's
He took on the sins of the world.
Mhm.
Everything. Yeah, he took on the sins of the world.
Shelley?
One thought I have is, when people fight against cancer and then it's like portrayed like a fight and then they lose and there's,
I hate that. When they say that, I hate that.
on that. And that people said at the time that he was being crucified, well, why don't you save yourself if you're really so great and you've got this in with God, why don't you save yourself? And so he went through the shame of what is human, which is we are going to die. And that can be in an odd way in our society, at least today, I don't know then, it can be kind of like, well, you lost, you died, you're mortal. And so that's a thought there.
Thank you. I think too, so that Shelley, that's another way of kind of reminding us that Jesus puts it on a level that we've all suffered shame, or we've all held shame, and we've all carried and managed our shame. So who has and can read on the next couple of verses, which would be
We're at 11:29, just to let you know.
oh, we're at 11:29. So I guess we should leave it there. I'm grateful for your tolerance of me having been put into this seat. And I really appreciate everybody. And maybe Diane, can you pray us out?
Sure. Lord, thank you for bringing us together today to talk about those topics that are on our hearts and on our minds, those things we wonder about, those things we challenge, those things that maybe keep us up at night. Thank you for Alvin and Elizabeth's leadership in keeping this Bible study going, and may we all go forth and serve the Lord. Amen.